What's going on, everybody? My name's Anthony, and today I'm going to be talking about The First Omen, a prequel no one asked for but was surprisingly better than I was expecting, and that is The First Omen, which is a prequel to Richard Donner's 1976 The Omen, which focused on an adoption gone horribly wrong as an American couple incidentally adopted the son of Satan. Personally, I never saw the sequels, but honestly, it's because I just didn't really love the original. I respect its mark on the genre, but it was just too much of a slog with not enough payoff in The First Omen. It follows an American woman who relocates to Rome to work in an orphanage and take her vows to Jesus. But obviously, when she's there, she finds a big conspiracy within the church to deliver the Antichrist. This is Arkasha's directorial debut, and honestly, I couldn't be happier for her, considering the fact that she was able to make me like a film that I had no prior love to its original franchise in the first place. Sure, she's worked on smaller stuff, but it's never the same level of a task when having to go on the big screen. She was able to match the tone of the original expertly and coated the movie with this overbearing dread and claustrophobia that really made you feel how much reverence she has for this franchise. A bad example of this is David Gordon Green's Exorcist the Believer, which you could tell he just wasn't able to recapture the atmosphere that the first one did. Stevenson did a great job projecting the paranoia of our lead and unrelenting malice of the gothic environment we're in. Hell, even the camera boasts this, with the camera working hand in hand with the music to help strengthen the vibe. Also, major props to Nell Tiger-Free, who just does such a great job in this role. You can really tell she puts her all into it. With the performance being so raw and gut-wrenching, it was just really great stuff. She starts off as a typical timid, to herself type of character who has a troubled past and connects with a young girl who has similar demons to her, which is in like all religious movies. She evolves with the movie, constantly adapting and at times being so feral that it just deserves recognition. Of course, there is fan service in this one, such as Father Brennan, who is now played by Ralph Ineson, was in one of my personal favorite movies ever, The Vivitch, and he is a deeply flawed father in that one. He kind of has that like surrogate role in this one, where he basically tells the story to both the audience and to our main character. They essentially recontextualize the things that the church did in the first film. Very much like Immaculate, this movie is a bodily autonomy horror film, as it talks about not having the ability to control your own body, and instead others manipulating the situation for them to make the decisions for your body. I think it does it not better, but also not worse than Immaculate, and I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing, as neither really portrayed this in a bad way. There's a bunch of pregnancy and labor stuff in this, which is gruesome and visceral, which helps heighten the severity of the situation and how dire it really is. But I will say, unlike Immaculate, this doesn't feel like it's an exploitation film, which Immaculate very much is, but that's not to say that's a bad thing. It's just something that I noticed, that even though it's showing very similar stuff, the themes and messages of the films are very different. And for me, it really helps enjoy both movies separately. Outside of that, there's a lot of good horror treats for fans, as there's a bunch of unsettling and creepy scenes kind of sprinkled throughout the film. Even the lighting plays a role in this, as many of the scares are shadows that make you question, did I actually see that? And yeah, there is a couple of jump scares that are cheap jump scares that are just like, you know, somebody's facing the camera and then there's a hand that grabs them from behind and like it's a big loud sound. And the barely visible jump scares that don't have any noise involved, those are personally one of my favorite types of scares, because it allows the mind to be the architect of the scare. Nothing is going to be scarier than what your imagination can create. At least that's how I like to think about it, but also it allows the audience to kind of interact with the film and be invested in what they're watching. Just in general, this movie is a slow burn and it's over 2 hours, so personally that's a con, because I like my 90-minute shorties, and with this one it takes a bit for this to get off the ground. One of the automatic hurdles this movie has to face is because we know this is a prequel, we know where it has to end, and so it makes it hard to subvert your expectation and restrict how much you can alter. But that's not just with this film, as that goes for all prequels. So sadly, there are things that are very predictable despite the fact that they made an effort to add twists along the way. One of the things that I didn't find as a con, but it is something that I just noticed, this movie is basically Rosemary's Baby. baby. And that's not to say that that's a bad thing. It's just when you understand that it's Rosemary's Baby, you quickly catch on to what's gonna probably happen. Despite all the great stuff about this movie, there are some things that kind of held me back a little bit. For example, the writing for some of these characters was a little bit hard to understand because characters were introduced, used, and then once we had no more use for them, they were kind of just written off from the screen entirely. We don't see them until like the end of the movie, and it's very blatant with some of these characters, mainly the love interest and the best friend, who are these characters that were honestly very interesting when they were introduced, and they felt like they were gonna lead up to bigger things, and I was actually invested in some of these characters. But then once you start seeing that it's like 30 minutes after we've last seen them and we're not gonna see them anytime after this, it kind of like makes me feel like, oh, like, you know, there should have been a way to have them still involved, not just completely like get rid of them. Honestly, that's kind of like just like nitpicking really, but one of my bigger issues with the movie is that the premise is basically that the church is trying to create the Antichrist to have people believe in them again, because there's a lot of exposition and a lot of screen time devoted to riots and basically the church telling us that the younger generation no longer believes in the church. So the church's solution to this is create the Antichrist so that people can be afraid of it, so they can go back and believe in the church. I found this a bit jarring just because I don't see the logic in it. I understand that we're told that there's two different sections of the church in this, one half being the one that believes in God and has like all these traditional beliefs that we know, but there's this other part that basically completely deviates from that path entirely. The whole point of the Christian belief is that the church wants God to come back, not the devil. Personally, I was raised Catholic, and albeit I'm not the most educated in religion, but that's like the first thing that they teach you. So I don't know, I mean, that's just kind of like a thing that I found a little bit confusing, that had to be the issue of the movie. Anyway, Father Brennan in the original was part of the cult and then regretted his decision. While here, he's not really part of the cult, and in fact, he's like trying to stop it. And just like in the original, Damien is born from a Jekyll, and in this one, Margaret is born from a Jekyll, but she also gives birth to his son and his daughter. But I'm not necessarily a fan of this plot point because I really like the fact that in a way Damien was like an anomaly, but adding in a family and an alive mother and sister, it just feels like tedious and unnecessary. They paid homage with the "It's all for you, Damien" and the Jekyll scene, which I think both were honestly done so good, especially with the Jekyll because you're never really shown his full image, and again it goes back to the whole thing that it lets the audience create that image of what the Jekyll could actually look like. It's always gonna be scarier than what it actually looks like if you just imagine it. The movie does just a great job at constantly suggesting what he might look at, as they can let you do the rest. The ending, which has nothing to do with Immaculate but line up pretty similarly in the sense of both performances were so raw and emotionally tolling that you could tell that like these were just really powerful moments for the characters. And then the ending dungeon scene where they're trying to extract the baby from her and nobody's really even blinking an eye at showing the severe lack of sympathy for her while they're doing this. It reminds me very much of Midsommar, when Florence Pugh's character is kind of like being empathized by all the females in that cult, where they're kind of crying with her. This is like the complete opposite of that, and it's almost just as scary in that sense because it almost like shows how dehumanized these people are. All to say, it was very dark and I really enjoyed it. All in all, while I do have some complaints about the movie, I do think as a debut film and just as heavy of a task as having to follow up a series such as The Omen, which like I said I'm not the biggest fan of but I can respect, it's so good that they were able to still make a strong prequel. So just generally speaking, I did enjoy the movie. While I do wish it would have had a little bit more levity, I understand that that's not the tone that it's going for, and if it's trying to follow up something like The Omen, then it's not gonna be able to do that because that just wasn't the tone of the original. And maybe that's honestly one of the reasons why I'm not the biggest fan of the original in the first place. But that's pretty much it for this one. I'll catch you guys in the next one. My name's Anthony. Peace.